Good afternoon, everybody. Who liked my little hop there onto the stage? Who's feeling nice and warm? And we're not complaining, are we? What a beautiful day it is. Welcome to the Germination Station stage. We are absolutely thrilled to welcome you to the first ever, that's right, the first ever Yo Valley Organic Garden Festival, a 3-day celebration of gardening for and with nature in mind, set in the very heart of Somerset. Today we have a theme. Friday theme, if you didn't know, is people and pollinators. Today we are buzzing with florals, fauna, and feel good growing. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Our aim for this Yo Valley Organic Garden Festival was to bring the gardening community together, and by the look of all your shining faces, we have done that successfully. We wanted to share ideas and see how you can do your bit to benefit our gardens and, most importantly, our planet. I want to give a big shout out to our sponsors. I'm going to do this, and you're all going to go, ooh, ready? Milwaukee, who have been creating exceptional Japanese garden tools for over 20 years. Oh, you're very kind to me. Thank you. Thank you so much. They are here, and they're also going to be on this stage later demonstrating their tools and a sharpening workshop. How sinisterly brilliant. I love it. But it's so nice to be here with you all today. I just wanted to tell you what we've got coming up before we get the man, the myth, the legend, Chris Smith on. He is going to be on from 1 p.m. to 1:45. And then from 2:15 to 3 p.m., we have Richard Rickett. What a name. He's not talking about a cricket. He's talking all things bees. So be sure to check that one out. And then 4 p.m. to 4:45, we have Hugh Frost talking sustainable garden pest management and gardening for wildlife. But that's all later. I'm going to live in the now for now. We have a talk about edible plants for pollinators and wildlife, and his name is Chris Smith. He has been involved in horticulture for many years, setting up Pennard Plants in 2001. At first, it was a general herbaceous grower, but in 2006, it switched to growing edible plants, and by 2010, maintained this as their main interest. Pennard Plants have exhibited at all the major flower shows, with their final gold medal at Chelsea in 2021. And then they gave it up and became mail order only. They sell a huge range of edible plants and offer around 600 varieties of seeds to home growers. Now that's enough from me. You're not here to listen to me. You are here to listen to the man, the myth, the legend. Please give a warm Yo Valley welcome to Chris Smith.
Thank you very much, and what a welcome that is. As you've heard, I am into edible plants, anything that's edible. And a little bit about the nursery and me. I have been growing plants for more years than I really would care to remember. And it all started off with my father and my grandfather, who were very keen vegetable growers, encouraging you to plant radishes or nasturtiums or whatever. And every Christmas I remember getting this little pack of seeds from one of the aunts, which was Carter's children's collection of seeds, told you've got to plant them. That's how it all started many, many years ago. As you heard, in 2001, we set up Pennard Plants. It's called Pennard Plants because it's in the village of East Pennard, not because my name is Pennard. But basically, we started growing general herbaceous plants. My interest has always been in growing food. You know, there's no point in growing things unless you can't eat it, is what I say. So basically, we moved into growing edibles sort of as a little bit of a sideline, because I give a lot of talks, and I wanted something to sell at the talks, and so seeds were the obvious answer because they're easy to take around. By the way, they sell our seeds here, but you can't buy them because they sold out yesterday. So, but basically, we moved into producing a range of heritage seeds. So vegetables that your grandfathers may have grown. That started off as a range of 50. It's now moved into something like 600. Some of them are heritage, but some of them are modern varieties where we feel that there is a need for something which otherwise we don't cover. Edible plants, though, were started growing in 2006. We exhibited at Chelsea almost every year from 2009 with edible plants in one form or another. And I think it's not just growing the plants, it's observing them, seeing what happens to them. And a lot of what I say today about pollinators are really from personal observation of what goes on in the nursery. Unlike Yo Valley, we're not 100% certified organic. We are organic. We don't use chemicals at all. But after I read the 200 pages of the regulations you needed to register for being organic, I really felt I wanted to spend more time growing plants and not reading regulations. So we are organic in a way, but not certified. Basically, what I want to say today is that all of the plants we grow in one way or another probably need the pollinators, which we are all so keen to keep coming to our gardens. Some of them attract pollinators better than others. And I think what you have to realise when it comes to pollinators is that not every plant really urgently needs a bee to come to its flower. A lot of plants are what we would call self-fertile. Some of them are pollinated by the fact that the wind will shake the flowers and the pollen will be from one flower to another just by that. In some cases, we need to give nature a helping hand with pollination, and we'll talk about early flowering plants in a while. But what we want to do is to plant things we can eat, but plants which will attract pollinators readily. And I bought one plant that you may certainly have eaten, but you probably haven't really recognised it as a pollinator. And this plant here with the red stems and the leaves that look a little bit like dandelions, this is chicory. Now, chicory, you sometimes see the leaves in salads. You'll certainly see the Brussels type of chicory that you see in the stores, the chicons of red or green. But chicory is actually a perennial plant, and it's a plant which is very easy to grow. And this one is actually just coming up to its second flowering. It flowered about a month ago. And I was so impressed with it because we actually haven't really grown it or concentrated on growing it for some time. But this comes up about 2 foot, 3 foot tall with the most beautiful blue flowers. And I was just so impressed by the number of bees that this plant attracted when there wasn't a lot else actually flowering in the edible range. And I know a lot of you will be growing flowers which are impressive right the way through the summer and which attracts your pollinators. But when you come to edible plants, okay, there's a lot in the spring. So you've got all your apples, pears, plums, all of that type of thing flowers in the spring. Then you move into perhaps the herbs, and we'll be talking about some more herbs later on. And they are really sort of early summer flowering. If you take chives, great attractors for pollinators. But that's fairly early summer. When it comes into the late summer, there's not an awful lot of edible plants that are flowering. Well, that's probably quite true, because if you're trying to grow berries or anything of that sort, by the time you get to the end of the summer, you want to be picking the berries. You don't want to have to be waiting for them to be pollinated. So this was a plant which really, for me, as a late flowering pollinating plant, did so well in the garden, and you can eat it. So that's one of the reasons I brought that along, just because you may not have thought about ever planting it. And it's a really good doer as well. When we start off the year, we start off with plants flowering in the edible garden in probably February time is about the earliest. One of the earliest plants to flower, there is a really lovely berry, which is called honeyberry. Honeyberry is a member of the honeysuckle family, Lonicera. and it flowers in the winter. Now, some of you may have got a winter flowering honeysuckle in your garden. There's lots, there's fragrance and various other varieties. But a honeyberry is a variety that originates from Russia. It actually stands really cold weather. I actually quite liked this last winter. It flowers with little yellow flowers around January, February time, and then it's followed by the most delicious berries. Those berries are elongated, like an elongated blueberry, and they come ready in June, when actually there's not a lot else available in the garden in the way of a berry that you can eat. It's quite sweet. The new varieties are quite sweet. The original that came from Siberia was a little tiny berry about the size of a pea, and actually is quite sharp. But the newer varieties that have been bred, mainly in Canada and some work in Japan, are delicious. The only thing is, they need to be pollinated. And basically, honeyberries, unlike a lot of other plants like blackberries or loganberries or any of those, they need 2 different varieties for the cross-pollination. So a lot of people plant one variety and then wonder why they don't get any fruit. That's why they don't get the fruit. And it's a difficult time of year for that pollination because there's not that many insects around which will carry out that task for you. They manage usually to be pollinated. We usually get a reasonable crop. But if you don't, or you're worried about getting that pollination, you need to help it along with a little brush going from one flower of one variety to the variety of the other. And the other plants that need a bit of a helping hand, because there's not a lot of insects around, particularly this last season when it was so wet and cold and the bees stayed in their hives, basically are things like peaches, nectarines, that type of fruit, which if you've got them in a greenhouse or got them on a wall in the garden, you really need to go around them and pollinate them yourself. Having said that, quite often in February, March, when they're actually flowering, we get some sunshine, and you soon notice that the bees and other pollinating insects will come out. What's interesting is that honeybees are not the best pollinators. They help, but they don't actually do a very good job. What you want in the garden is the little solitary bees, the masonry bees, the bumblebees, which have got big hairy legs and so transfer lots and lots of pollen from one plant to another. They're actually not after that pollen, in most cases. They're actually after the nectar that the flowers contain. That's the sweet part. That's the part that they'll take back to their hives, if they're a honeybee, to make the honey with. The pollen is also important in that it helps, they use that to feed the younger bees and the queen, but it's actually a bit of a byproduct. And what they're doing is they're getting the nectar, rubbing themselves on the flower, and then taking pollen onto their hairy legs and transferring that to the next flower that they go to. We're not only talking bees here, we're talking other insects which can be used or very good at pollinating, like moths and butterflies, which come out later in the season, hoverflies as well, which are very important in the garden because they also eat aphid larvae. And those are also important pollinators, as are wasps. So you may think there's no earthly reason for wasps, but wasps, as they are gathering nectar from the flowers, are also acting as pollinating insects. And certain plants are pollinated by flies as well. And these plants actually attract their pollinators in various ways, sometimes by colour, sometimes by smell. And in fact, if you look at a lot of plants, particularly edible plants, they often have very open flowers and very single. The flowers are mostly single. If you look at an apple tree or a medlar or a quince, the flowers are single, big and open, so that that pollinating insect can get into that flower. We all like to grow something a bit more exotic, so we perhaps grow a lot of double flowers in our flower garden, whether it be asters or dahlias or whatever. They're not that brilliant for pollinating insects because they can't actually get into the flower and get to where the pollen and the nectar is. So a lot of double flowers you quite often find are sterile, so they don't produce seed at all. Because the other point about getting pollination is that it will develop seeds in the plant, and that's how this plant reproduces. I brought along just one example, because there's not many of these, but if you want a really good succession of flowers in the garden that bees and other pollinators, butterflies absolutely adore, that's alliums, the onion family. So the onion family, you can get onion varieties that flower right the way through from around April time through to October. So if I mentioned chives early on. Chives are great attractors of pollinators. And what people generally don't realise is that all of the chives plant is edible. The flowers, the leaves, all can be used in various ways. And the best thing of treating chives is once they've flowered, they begin to look a bit sad. Most alliums, when they flower, the leaves tend to go a bit yellow and they don't look very attractive. So with chives, you just cut them right down to the ground, completely down to the ground. Don't leave a stub, just cut them down to the ground, and within 2 months, they'll be in flower again. And bear in mind that chives you can get in all different colours, white, pink, mauve, and so forth. Usually the mauve ones are the best from the point of view of attracting the pollinators. And they're being pollinated to produce seed. So this is another allium. This is one of the latest alliums to flower. This was actually in a greenhouse, so although it's perfectly hardy outside, had it inside because we want to collect the seed from it. This is Allium hookeri, hooker's onion. It's another allium variety that you can use everything on it, the leaves, the roots even. They're not bulbous, so they're not like the alliums you plant in your garden in the spring, or you plant them now to flower in the spring. They haven't got a bulb, they're an actual plant. And this one has just finished flowering, and there are a number of bees that have been around this over the past month. It's just incredible. And they've been very successful because you can see here all of the seed which is forming on this particular variety. And so if you want a good succession of flowering plants which will not only be edible but will attract your pollinating insects, the allium family is really worth looking at. I think at the last count we probably offer about 20 different varieties of edible alliums that will flower right the way through the season. We shouldn't ignore flowers, of course, in the garden, because a lot of edible flowers can also be extremely good attractors of insects. Nasturtiums, borage, which is the classic bee plant. It's supposed to be one of the best plants for attracting bees. And pansies, carnation-type plants, members of the dianthus family. All of those which are edible also are really good attractors of pollinating insects. Now, so far, we've sort of talked about herbs as a general topic, but this is a bit of a scrap-looking example, but again, from observation of the best plants to attract bees. This is actually a purple basil. It's a variety you can't grow from seed. You grow this variety from cuttings. And I've actually used it this year as an ornamental plant in some pots at home because I wanted something different. You know, I didn't want geraniums or fuchsias. I've grown those for years at home just to make the house look attractive. I wanted to grow something edible. So we used this. We used a plant called oxalis, which some of you may know as a plant for the house. It has purple foliage and triangular 3 leaves. Oxalis are mainly used for just brightening up your salads because they have a really lemony flavour to them. Don't use too many of the leaves because basically they can be poisonous if you ate too many. They're oxalic acid in them is the part that's poisonous. Just a few leaves add a bit of lemony flavour to your salad. So I grew those in the pot as well. But this has been really so outstanding. It made quite a big bush in the pots, and the bees were round it from morning till night. Just hundreds and hundreds of bees, all different sorts. And you can see here they've been, again, quite successful because the flower is normally a pinky purple. But all of these have been pollinating and producing seeds. And, of course, the smell, I brought it in this morning and somebody said, oh, what's that smell? And I said, it's the basil. It's just so strong. And you can use it in cooking exactly the same as you would a normal basil. But it's just that little bit hardier. You can take cuttings of it and keep it over the winter rather than having to bother with seeds. And unlike the large leaf basils, which really do need really warm conditions, this one will actually grow when it gets a bit cooler as well. So you can take cuttings almost off that now. And then you've got plants like mint. Mint is a really good plant for attracting bees. You shouldn't be afraid to let it flower, because most people, when mint starts to flower, it begins to look a bit tatty. But if you want to attract those pollinators to your garden, just let the mint flower and then chop it down. And don't forget, again, we chopped all our mint down about 3-4 weeks ago, and it's already growing and green and producing more leaves now for use. Oreganos, the oreganos or oreganos or the marjorams, they're all more or less the same family. Again, really, really great herbs for bees. They really do love them. And then also, as some of them are flower a little bit later on, you get the butterflies as well, which collect on them. And they're absolutely fantastic at attracting those essential pollinators to your garden. There's also another thing you can do for those pollinators. If you grow vegetables, carrots, parsley, maybe parsnips, onions, they all grow the first year and we harvest them. We pull the carrots, we pull the parsnips, we take the onions out. Has it ever occurred to you, well, that's okay, but where does the seed come from? I sow the seed, which I buy in a packet, but where does it actually come from? Because mine actually aren't going to seed. Well, particularly with carrots, parsnips, beetroot, they will grow 1 year and produce seed the second year. But of course, we've already pulled them out the garden by then. So basically, if you want to grow those type of things for seed, and the flowers are really good for attracting pollinators, you need to actually leave them in the ground or replant them. And then the second year, they'll produce their flowers and their seed. And that way, they're really good for the pollinating insects. Usually you'll find onions, for example, will quite often bolt and run to seed if the weather's wrong in their first year. But normally you would replant those onions and they would flower the second year. And the other thing, if again, you may always just chop it down when it starts to seed. But parsley is usually treated as a biennial. You grow it 1 year, crop it, leave it. Next year it will come into seed, and then you get rid of it. But the flowers are really, really good for pollinating insects. So if you've got a row of parsley and you think, oh, it's all done, I'm going to take it out, do leave just a few plants for the pollinating insects to enjoy. And then you can always collect your seed as well. Thymes, sage, rosemary, lavender, of course, they're all really good attractors of pollinating insects. And while we're on the sort of subject of Mediterranean, I just brought this one along because, in fact, this plant, and you're always learning in this game, gardening is one of those things you will never know it all, trust me. This was introduced to me. This is Tacurium, and it's a lovely silver blue bush. If you want to attract pollinators, this doesn't have any culinary purpose, but for attracting bees, it is amazing. You can use it as a little low hedge or something like that by keeping it trimmed and cut it back. But these were little cuttings about 3-4 months ago. And it's a really attractive plant with a blue flower. And again, the bees love it. They really will come to your garden if you plant that in there. So it's worthwhile thinking about, what do I need in my garden? What do I want to get pollinated? What don't I want to get pollinated? Because remember, you're trying to grow, for example, squashes or courgettes or pumpkins, and you think, I want to save the seed on that. Well, basically, you've got to grow one variety. And you've also got to make sure that your neighbour only grows one variety. Because if you save the seed, the chances are that those pollinating insects will have done their job and crossed 2 or 3 varieties, and what you'll probably get is something that's almost inedible. And I always say the classic is runner beans. If you think you've got your own strain of runner bean in your garden, well, I hope that nobody within 3 miles has planted runner beans. Because basically, they are very promiscuous, and the bees love them, and they will transfer pollen from one to another. So when you shell them out, you'll find that the beans inside might have been usually sort of mottled colour, brown and black. You'll probably find some white ones and some pink ones and goodness knows what else, because the bees have done their job. They've been around and they've cross-pollinated from one to another. Now, you can grow French beans, okay. You can grow as many French beans in your garden as you like, because basically they are self-fertile. They do not interbreed. You can grow peas, same thing. But runner beans and various other crops, particularly brassicas, the cabbages, cabbage family, and so on, if you let them seed, they will cross varieties, and primarily you'll never get the same variety again. So that's always worth considering. Some things you may want to have cross-pollinated, other things you may not. If, for example, you wanted to keep your squash seed, what you'd have to do is go out there at midnight, bundle up with a little elastic band the male flowers so they don't get pollinated, and then go and actually do the pollination yourself. By the way, male flowers do not have the fruits behind them. I could not convince a customer a couple of weeks ago that their cucumbers, she said, I'm taking off all the flowers which have cucumbers on, and I'm leaving the ones that didn't. No, that's not quite how it works. The ones that have the little fruits on are the female flowers. The ones which you don't want to have pollination of are the male flowers, the ones that don't have that fruit behind them. So it's worth thinking about that. So just a couple more plants, just to give you an idea about pollinators. This one is very interesting, because this flowers at the bottom. This little spike coming up here is actually the flower. This is Japanese ginger, and the flowers are highly prized in Japan and very, very expensive. It's a really good plant for shade, by the way, and it's really attractive in terms of its leaf. So how do you think this is pollinated? Bees generally don't scurry around on the ground. This is pollinated by slugs. So next time you think there's nothing good about slugs in your garden, just remember they actually do some good. Actually, they do a lot of good, because they eat a lot of the old rubbish in your garden. But that's just an example. Sometimes there are a lot of different pollinators. Figs, okay, this is an edible fig. This is one you'll grow in the garden and pick the figs off. But a lot of other fig relatives are pollinated specifically by a particular type of wasp. They're only pollinated by this specific type of wasp, which actually burrows into the flower and lays its eggs and then dies. And then the fig actually acts as a host to those little wasps. So next time you're thinking about pollinators, just don't think about bees. There's so many others out there. And we'll finish off on this one, because I think it's about time that we had some questions. This is, although it doesn't look very much at the moment, this is Korean mint. This is a variety of agastache that you may grow a lot of decorative forms of in your garden. But this has the most amazing violet-coloured flowers, which the bees absolutely adore, and also butterflies too. You can, when we've finished, you can come just smell this. This is really licorice. It's great in teas. It's great in desserts. And the other thing about it is, because not all moths and butterflies do we want to attract, this will help keep off that dreaded cabbage white butterfly that makes your cabbages like lace curtains. And you just plant some of these where your brassicas are, and the smell will put off that dreaded cabbage white butterfly that I have been fighting all summer at home, I must admit, because I forgot to plant some of this year. There we are. Edible plants for pollinators. There are loads more plants out there. Many, many of them which flower early and will attract pollinators. Some of them which flower late, we're always looking at. The latest flowering plant isn't edible, which in fact bees love, is ivy. So if you've got ivy in your garden, you think, I've got to get that off the wall because it's ruining the wall and so on. Well, do leave a little bit for the bees, but don't bother. If anybody offers you ivy honey, don't bother. It is the most disgusting honey you've ever tasted. With that, I'll finish, and hopefully we get a few questions about edible plants and pollinators. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, wasn't that an incredibly informative talk? Thank you so much, Chris. We have now got time for questions. We've got some roaming mics by our wonderful volunteers at the back. Stick your hands nicely up in the air like you just don't care. We'll go over here first, and then we will go over here next. Thank you so much.
Hi. I've got a lemon tree that I've grown from a pip, but it's never flowered and got nothing on it. Is it likely to be just sterile and need to give
Okay, so if you've grown it from a pip, it can take up to 10 years before it starts to flower. So commercially, when you see lemon trees for sale, and we sell lemon trees, they're always grafted onto a rootstock, and that way they will flower after 2 or 3 years. But don't give up on it, because it will eventually flower. But again, growing it from seed, you don't actually know what the lemon's going to be like. Because basically, if you grow an apple tree from seed, if you grow it from a Cox's apple, you won't get a Cox's in return. You might get something better, but you might get something worse.
Okay. So I should stick with it. Put me in hospital with neosepticemia from off the thorn.
The thorns, yeah.
So I better stick with it.
Yes.
Lovely, thank you for your question. We'll go over here next, and hands in the air, and we'll go over in that corner next. Thank you so much.
Hi, so can you plant carrot tops? So if I wanted to harvest my carrots, cut the tops and then replant them, would that then seed the following year?
That should then produce seed. As long as you leave a good piece of the carrot on there, that should then the following year produce seed. And in fact, I mean, you can store carrots or you can store onions or whatever over the winter and then plant them in the spring and they will produce their seed. Yeah.
So you should keep them and then plant them in the spring rather than putting them straight back in the soil?
Yeah, you should plant them in spring because that way they will then quickly flower and produce their seed.
Thank you.
Great question. We're going to go over here, and then we're going to go over there, and then I'll look back over here.
Hi there. I'm a bit... sorry, hi. I'm big on reducing food waste and basically growing edible plants from foods that we already have. And so one of the big things I have, though, is I'm always trying to grow... It's all berries. Is it possible to grow black... You know how you have like your blackberries, you can grow blackberries and things like that. But is it possible to grow things like apricots and things like that from apricot seeds? Because I never seen my avocados and things like that. They seem to grow and get bigger, but they never seem to get fruit.
So basically, all fruit trees, nearly all fruit trees, are grafted. Okay. Figs, by the way, are grown on their own roots, but generally fruit trees are grafted, and the reason they're grafted is for two things. One is to get early fruiting, but two is to control their growth and know how big they're going to grow. If you grow them from pips or seeds, like the lady's lemon tree here, it will take quite a long time for them to come into bearing. It's probably better, if you really do want to try growing them from another plant, to try cuttings. Because sometimes apples in particular, they've been successfully grown on their own roots. They're now doing it with cherries. The only problem is generally you don't know how that tree is going to grow. It will come true to the variety if it roots, but you won't particularly know whether it's going to be big, small, how it's going to grow. It's really difficult, and that's why, for example, apple trees, you've got maybe 10 different rootstocks available to you, because it's basically telling you how big that tree is going to grow. Okay?
Marvellous. And then we've got a question over here. Anyone else? Lovely. And then we're going to go over here. Perfect.
Thanks. I've got. I bought a quince from you a few years back at Chelsea. It's been absolutely brilliant this year, having been in a pot for goodness knows how long. I then put it in the ground, and I have got, I don't know how many hundreds of quinces. But my question is, should I prune it? And an additional question to that, also a pruning question, is I also have a fig, which I didn't buy from you, but I have a fig which is very long and tall, and I don't know whether I need to cut that down so that that will start springing up from the bottom.
Okay, so to deal with the quince first, quince generally you only lightly prune, basically because of where it flowers. And whenever you're looking at plants, you need to study where the fruit comes. And so quinces are quite interesting because sometimes they bear on the end of the branches, on the tips. Sometimes they produce halfway down. So sometimes it's on spurs and sometimes it's on the end. If you cut all that growth off when you prune, basically you'll have a barren year without much fruit the following year. So really light pruning is the thing to do, and just to shape it and keep the centre open in the winter. Okay? Figs. Figs are always a great one for me because people always let their figs grow longer and longer and longer. And every year, as they grow, this is all new growth, as they grow, the fruit comes on the new growth that it makes this year. So basically, this will grow again next year, and the fruit will be out here. And then it will grow again, and the fruit will be out here. So what you've got to do with it, in the winter, if it's really gone leggy, you can prune back into old growth, the brown wood. In the summer, all you need to do is to nip the tops of the new growth. Now, this is a bit late to do this now because this has gone really hard, but you'd normally do it maybe early August, and then it will produce figs on that new growth. Anything other than little tiny figs about the size of a pea you need to take off as well, because they won't develop. We don't get 2 crops of figs in this country. But basically, with a fig, you need to keep it under control, because otherwise it will grow and grow and grow, and you'll end up with a 3 metre, well, more than that, probably 10-metre monster. So don't forget, old wood in the winter, January, new wood in the summer. And don't be afraid to cut it back.
Marvellous. Thank you so much. And we've got a question over here by the doorway.
Oh, hi there. My question is, I work with young children, 3 to 5 years of age. Is there a herb or a specific plant that you would recommend to help teach them about pollination?
I would probably grow something like nasturtiums because they're quick growing. They can eat the leaves and they can eat the flowers, won't do them any harm at all. But also it's a very open flower. And quite often you'll then see the pollinating insects inside that flower. And sometimes, you've probably all seen it, you know, the bees actually sort of get drunk with the amount of pollen and nectar they've collected. And they sort of have a quick doze in the flower. So I would grow something like that that's very open. That's only an annual. If you wanted to grow a perennial, probably something like campanula is quite good. Or even something like the chicory, actually, because you can grow that from seed and it produces masses of flowers and will attract masses of pollinating insects. Okay?
A great question. Tomorrow our theme is Mission Possible, inspiring the next generations of gardeners. So great question. We've probably got time for one more question, folks. All the way over there on the left.
Hello. I was very excited when you said all alliums are edible, because I've just bought some ones that are sort of ornamental, different colours, on bulbs. I just wondered if there's a distinction between the really pretty tall ones and the general spring onion.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. So the ornamental varieties that you grow from bulbs are generally, you could eat them and they won't poison you, but they will not have the flavour that an edible allium does. So this type of allium that we've got here, the edible alliums, generally are not grown from bulbs, other than your onions, for example. They're generally grown as a plant, and you won't find a bulb underneath them. If you take something like Welsh onion, which is a very popular perennial onion and will keep on growing, it will actually produce something like a spring onion at the base, and that, of course, is edible. But I wouldn't try and, if you've bought things like Purple Splendor or any of those ornamental alliums, I wouldn't try eating those. Having said that, there is one which is called the Bristol onion, which is allium, which I can never pronounce, but it has the sort of brush-like little flowers at the top. That is actually edible. Okay.
Marvellous. That's all we've got time for, unless someone is absolutely bursting to ask a question. If not, please put your hands together and give a massive Yo Valley thank you to Chris Smith.